On North Korea's eastern coast, a palace complex sprawls across Wonsan's waterfront. Satellite imagery from 2024 shows an equestrian center, multiple villas, a private yacht basin, and what appears to be a water park. Construction crews worked on expansions as recently as 2023. The cost of this single compound is estimated at over 600 million. 20 miles inland, villages lack reliable electricity. Malnutrition rates among children approach 20%. The average annual income is under $2,000. Kim Jong-un ordered these additions after inheriting power in 2011. His grandfather built the first palaces. His father expanded the system to at least 17 major complexes. Kim Jong-un continued their work even as satellites documented everything and international sanctions targeted luxury goods. The palaces were never supposed to survive exposure. They were built in secret, maintained in secret, defended by layers of security and deception. That secrecy ended. The palaces remain. Understanding why requires returning to where it started. On 1953. A nation in ruins. The 27th of July, 1953. Representatives from North Korea, China, and the United Nations signed an armistice agreement at Panmunjom, ending 3 years of combat. The Korean War had killed an estimated 2.5 million people. It destroyed 80% of North Korea's industrial capacity. Pyongyang, the capital, lay in ruins. American bombers had targeted it systematically. By the war's end, roughly 75% of the city's buildings were damaged or destroyed completely. The northern half of the peninsula faced devastation on a scale few nations had experienced. Roads had been bombed into rubble. Bridges were gone. Rail lines were twisted metal. Factories stood as burned shells. The agricultural infrastructure that fed the population had been systematically targeted. What remained was rubble and displaced people. Kim Il-sung emerged from the war with absolute control over the communist government. He was 41 years old. He had spent the war years directing operations from bunkers and temporary headquarters, moving constantly to avoid American bombing raids. The experience shaped his thinking about leadership and security. Within months of the armistice, construction crews began work on his first dedicated residence, not in Pyongyang, where rebuilding the capital required visible progress, but in the countryside north of the city. The location offered strategic advantages. Mountains provided natural cover. Distance from the urban population meant security could be controlled absolutely. Escape routes could be established to multiple directions. The priorities revealed themselves through action. The general population received basic housing, reconstructed slowly through collective labor. Industrial facilities received some attention because military strength required functioning factories. The leadership received purpose-built compounds constructed with imported materials and foreign expertise. Soviet advisors arrived in 1954. They brought architectural plans based on Stalin's dacha system. The Soviet leader had maintained multiple residences throughout Russia, each serving specific purposes. Summer retreats in warm climates, mountain compounds for security, suburban Moscow residences for regular government business. The model demonstrated how authoritarian leaders could maintain power while remaining separated from the populations they controlled. The North Korean government studied these examples carefully. The first leadership compound, completed in 1955, occupied several acres outside Pyongyang. Security perimeters extended beyond the main residence. Staff quarters housed guards and domestic workers. The structure itself remained modest compared to what would come later, concrete construction with basic amenities. But it established the principle: leadership would live apart. Additional sites were selected throughout 1955 and 1956. A mountain retreat near Myeoyangsan offered cool summers and isolation. A coastal location south of Wonsan provided ocean access. A facility within Pyongyang itself allowed for government business without the leader residing among ordinary citizens. Each location served different purposes. All remained hidden from public knowledge. The construction happened while the nation rebuilt from devastation. Workers who might have repaired schools or hospitals were diverted to leadership facilities. Materials that could have housed displaced families went to compounds most citizens would never see. The allocation of resources was deliberate and systematic. Kim Il-sung introduced Juche ideology in 1955. The doctrine emphasized self-reliance. North Korea would depend on no other nation. The country would build its own economy, create its own military strength, and follow its own political path. The rhetoric saturated every aspect of public life. The reality was different. Soviet construction expertise built the early compounds. Chinese economic aid funded reconstruction efforts. Imported luxury goods filled leadership residences. Crystal chandeliers came from Czechoslovakia. Vehicles arrived from East Germany. Fine fabrics were shipped from Soviet textile factories. Self-reliance applied to the general population. The elite relied on foreign suppliers. The pattern would persist for 7 decades. Public statements emphasized national independence and sacrifice. Behind security perimeters, leadership consumed imported goods and lived in structures that bore no resemblance to ordinary North Korean housing. By 1958, Kim Il-sung controlled at least 5 separate residential compounds. Intelligence reports from South Korean and American sources attempted to track their locations. The North Korean government never acknowledged they existed. Official photographs showed Kim visiting factories or meeting with agricultural cooperatives. Where he actually slept remained classified. The comparison to South Korea was striking. The southern government, supported by American aid, prioritized industrial reconstruction and infrastructure development. President Syngman Rhee lived in a modest official residence in Seoul. Government officials worked from functional buildings that served administrative purposes. Resources flowed toward economic recovery. Both nations faced the same post-war devastation. The choices made in the 1,950 seconds revealed different philosophies. South Korea invested in economic foundations that would eventually create prosperity. North Korea invested in security infrastructure that would maintain authoritarian control. The early compounds were not palaces. They were functional residences that provided security and separation. The scale was modest. The amenities were basic by later standards. But they established the architecture of permanent power. They demonstrated that national resources could be diverted toward leadership priorities regardless of population needs. Kim Il-sung understood something fundamental about maintaining control. Physical distance from the population made leadership decisions easier. Living among those affected by policy created complications. Living apart, in spaces designed specifically for elite needs, allowed for governance without constant confrontation with consequences. The compounds also provided reward structures. Loyal officials could be granted access to certain facilities. Trusted advisors could stay at leadership residences. The system created incentives for maintaining the political order. Access to comfort became currency in a nation where most lived in poverty. International observers initially dismissed reports about the compounds. Defectors who described them were treated with skepticism. The scale seemed impossible. A nation that could barely feed its population was supposedly building multiple luxurious residences for its leadership? The claims appeared exaggerated. They were not. By the end of the 1,950 seconds, the foundation was complete. Kim Il-sung had established control. The Soviet model had been adopted and adapted. The principle of leadership separation had been institutionalized through architecture. The compounds existed and were expanding. What had been created would grow. The modest facilities of the 1,950 seconds would become elaborate estates. The handful of compounds would multiply into dozens. The system that began with basic security needs would evolve into something far more extravagant. Kim Il-sung had resources and Soviet blueprints. He had absolute power and decades ahead of him to exercise it. He had demonstrated that national reconstruction could happen alongside elite construction. The two projects could run simultaneously, drawing from the same devastated economy. Now he needed to ensure permanence. not just for himself, but for his family. The compounds were not temporary wartime necessities. They were the foundation of a dynasty, and dynasties required planning. Kim Il-sung consolidated absolute power throughout the 1,960 seconds. Potential rivals within the Communist Party were removed through purges, disguised as ideological corrections. By 1967, he had eliminated every significant challenge to his authority. He was 55 years old and controlled every aspect of North Korean political life. He understood that maintaining control required more than political maneuvering. It required symbols. In communist systems, leadership legitimacy came partly from living differently than the masses claimed equality demanded. Stalin had maintained numerous dachas across the Soviet Union. Mao Zedong kept compounds in Beijing and various provinces. The residences demonstrated power while remaining officially invisible to the populations these leaders governed. Kim Il-sung studied these models carefully. The compounds he had built in the 1,950 seconds served basic security needs. What came next would serve dynasty-building purposes. In 1964, he began discussing succession with his inner circle. The leadership would not transfer to another party member after his death. It would remain within his family. His eldest son, Kim Jong-il, was born in 1941. The official biography claimed he was born on Mount Paektu, the sacred Korean mountain. The actual birthplace was a Soviet military camp where his father had trained during World War II. The mythology started early. By the time Jong-il reached his 20s, propaganda already presented him as exceptional. Jong-il showed little interest in military affairs or economic policy. His passions were film, architecture, and luxury goods. In the late 1,960 seconds, his father sent him to study political economy at Kim Il-sung University. The coursework was largely symbolic. What mattered was establishing his credentials as a future leader. In 1973, Kim Il-sung formally designated his son as successor. Kim Jong-il was 32 years old. He took charge of propaganda and cultural affairs within the party structure. His department controlled every newspaper, every film production, every artistic output. He also received another portfolio, oversight of leadership residences. The decision revealed calculation. Managing the compounds required discretion and attention to detail. The work involved foreign suppliers, construction contracts, and maintaining secrecy. It kept Jong-il occupied with practical responsibilities while preparing him for power. It also allowed him to shape the spaces where the family would live for decades. Jong-il approached the assignment with enthusiasm. He commissioned studies of palaces around the world. Plans were obtained through diplomatic channels and intelligence services. He studied the materials used in Soviet facilities. He examined photographs of Chinese leadership compounds. He reviewed architectural drawings from Eastern European estates. The expansion began in the mid-1970 seconds. Existing compounds were renovated with imported materials. New sites were selected across the country. The modest facilities from the 1,950 seconds were insufficient for dynastic ambitions. What Kim Jong-il envisioned required greater scale and luxury. Funding came through Bureau 39, a secretive department within the Workers' Party of Korea. The Bureau was established in the late 1970 seconds, specifically to generate foreign currency through illicit activities. It operated insurance fraud schemes. It manufactured and exported counterfeit currency. It sold weapons to anyone willing to pay. It dealt in narcotics through diplomatic channels, immune from search. Bureau 39 generated hundreds of millions of dollars annually. The exact figures remain classified. Defectors who worked within the Bureau later estimated annual revenue between 500 million and 1 billion. Most went to maintaining the Kim family lifestyle and expanding the palace system. Ryongsong Residence, designated Residence Number 55 inches, the internal classification system, became the primary expansion project. The compound north of Pyongyang grew from a single building to a complex spanning hundreds of acres. Multiple villas were constructed within the security perimeter. Guest houses accommodated visiting officials. Underground bunkers provided protection during potential attacks. A private train station allowed secure arrivals and departures. Construction materials came from dozens of countries. Italian marble was shipped through Chinese ports. German bathroom fixtures arrived via diplomatic containers. French wallpaper and fabrics came through Soviet supply channels. Japanese electronics were purchased by front companies and routed through sympathetic nations. Every item was selected personally by Kim Jong-il or his appointed representatives. The work proceeded invisibly. No government announcements mentioned palace construction. Official budgets contained no line items for leadership residences. Workers were recruited from military engineering units and sworn to secrecy. Those who completed projects were often reassigned to remote locations afterward, ensuring knowledge remained compartmentalized. By 1980, the system had expanded significantly. Intelligence analysts in South Korea and the United States attempted to track the growth through aerial photography and defector testimony. They identified at least 7 major compounds and numerous smaller facilities. The actual number was higher. Some locations remained undetected for decades. The scale exceeded what neighboring countries built for their leaders. China's leaders maintained a few compounds in Beijing and provincial retreats. The Soviet Politburo members had dachas but shared many facilities. Romania's Ceausescu built several palaces, but nothing approaching North Korean numbers. Only Kim Il-sung was constructing an entire archipelago of luxury estates across his territory. The comparison to how ordinary North Koreans lived was stark. In 1980, the average citizen earned roughly $400 annually. Housing consisted of cramped apartments or basic rural dwellings. Electricity was unreliable outside Pyongyang. Running water was scarce. Food rations provided subsistence levels of nutrition, but little variety. Meanwhile, the palaces featured climate control, swimming pools, theaters, and kitchens stocked with imported delicacies. The amenities were not public knowledge. Citizens lived unaware of the precise conditions their leaders enjoyed. But the general pattern was understood. Leadership lived differently. Kim Jong-il took increasingly active control through the 1,980 seconds. His father, now in his 70s, granted him authority over more government functions. Managing the palaces had prepared him for broader responsibilities. He demonstrated competence in logistics and discretion. He could be trusted with state secrets. The palace system served multiple purposes. It provided security through dispersion. Potential enemies could not target leadership if they did not know where leaders resided at any given time. It demonstrated power to those granted access. Foreign officials who visited saw that North Korean leadership commanded substantial resources. It created distance from population problems. Policy decisions that caused suffering were made from spaces insulated from consequences. Kim Il-sung had built the foundation. His son had expanded it into something more elaborate. By the mid-1980 seconds, the palace system represented decades of accumulated resources, foreign expertise, and deliberate planning. It was no longer just about security or basic needs. It had become an institution. What had been created was mostly hidden, but those who needed to know understood its existence. Senior party officials knew. Foreign intelligence services tracked what they could detect. The general population remained largely unaware of the full scope. That would change eventually. Technology would make secrecy impossible. Defectors would provide detailed accounts. But in 1985, the system remained largely successful at concealing itself. Kim Jong-il had the resources, the vision, and his father's backing. The compounds existed across mountains, coasts, and suburbs. The funding mechanisms operated smoothly. The construction expertise had been assembled. Everything was ready. The question was no longer if the system would expand. The question was how far expansion would go. How many compounds would eventually exist? How much would be spent? What level of luxury would satisfy dynastic ambitions? Those answers would emerge over the following decades. But the architecture of permanent power was already complete. The rest was simply construction. Construction on the expanded Ryongsong residence began in 1983. The existing compound north of Pyongyang had served adequately for basic leadership needs. What Kim Jong-il planned would transform it into something far more elaborate. The project would take 7 years and cost an estimated $200 million. For comparison, North Korea's entire annual health budget in 1983 was approximately $150 million. Site preparation required military engineering units. Hundreds of soldiers cleared additional acreage, excavated for foundations, and constructed perimeter security infrastructure. The work happened behind walls that prevented observation from nearby roads. Guard towers were positioned every 200 meters around the expanded boundary. Underground bunkers were dug deep into the bedrock beneath the main buildings. The first shipment of Italian marble arrived in early 1984. 40 tons of Carrara white marble, the same stone used in Michelangelo's sculptures, came through Chinese ports on trucks marked as industrial equipment. The marble would line floors in main reception areas, bathrooms, and the primary residence's entrance hall. Additional shipments followed throughout the year. By December 1984, more than 150 tons of Italian marble had been delivered to various palace construction sites across the country. Bathroom fixtures came from Germany. Villeroy and Boch supplied custom porcelain, manufactured to specifications provided through intermediary companies. The fixtures were gold-plated in workshops near Pyongyang before installation. Each bathroom in the expanded Ryongsong complex featured dual vanities, separate shower and bathtub enclosures, heated floors, and bidets. The total cost for bathroom installations across one palace exceeded $3 million. French suppliers provided wallpaper, fabrics, and decorative materials. Silk wall coverings were ordered in quantities sufficient to cover thousands of square meters. Curtains were custom-made in workshops outside Paris and shipped via Soviet diplomatic channels. The fabrics featured patterns selected personally by Kim Jong-il from sample books flown to Pyongyang by representatives who believed they were dealing with Chinese government buyers. Electronics presented the greatest challenge. North Korea faced trade restrictions that prevented direct purchase of advanced Japanese and German equipment. Bureau 39 established front companies in Macau, Hong Kong, and Singapore to purchase and ship prohibited items. Sony televisions, Panasonic audio equipment, and high-end kitchen appliances from Miele and Bosch arrived in diplomatic containers that customs officials were prohibited from inspecting. The labor force consisted primarily of military conscripts from engineering units. They worked in shifts that ran dawn to dusk, 6 days per week. Skilled tradespeople were recruited from the general population through what the government termed voluntary assignments. Refusal meant reassignment to harsher duties or reduced food rations for families. Most accepted. Foreign specialists were brought in for work requiring expertise North Korean workers lacked. Chinese contractors with experience in luxury construction supervised certain phases. Russian technicians installed electrical systems. The foreign workers lived in separate compounds under constant surveillance. They signed contracts that prohibited discussing anything they observed. Most had no idea they were building leadership palaces. They were told the facilities were government offices or diplomatic residences. Ryongsong was not the only project under construction. At Hyangsan, designated Residence Number 3, similar work proceeded throughout the mid-1982s. The mountain compound expanded to include multiple villas, a private theater capable of seating 200, an indoor swimming pool with retractable roof, and stables for horses imported from Europe. The theater received a 35mm projection system purchased through East German intermediaries. Sound equipment was sourced from British manufacturers who believed they were selling to Chinese hotel developers. Coastal compounds near Wonsan underwent renovation and expansion between 1985 and 1988. The location offered direct ocean access. Private docks were constructed to accommodate yachts purchased through networks that obscured final ownership. A helicopter pad allowed for rapid movement between residences. Guest villas were built to house visiting officials from friendly nations. Each villa featured full amenities, including kitchens stocked with imported food and wine cellars containing thousands of bottles from French and Italian vineyards. Security infrastructure expanded alongside residential construction. Underground tunnels connected major buildings within each compound. The tunnels were wide enough to accommodate vehicles and featured air filtration systems, communication lines, and emergency supplies. At Ryong-song, the tunnel network extended for more than 3 kilometers beneath the compound. Entrances were hidden in structures that appeared to be utility buildings or storage facilities. Each compound received multiple security perimeters. The outer boundary typically consisted of walls or fencing patrolled by guards with dogs. Inner perimeters added electronic surveillance systems imported from Japan and Germany. Motion sensors covered approaches. Cameras monitored every angle. Guard forces numbered in the hundreds per location. Soldiers were rotated regularly to prevent familiarity that might compromise security. The total cost of construction and expansion throughout the 1980s and early 1990s was estimated by South Korean intelligence at between $500 million and $800 million. The exact figure remains classified in North Korean government records. Defectors who worked in construction or logistics later provided details that allowed analysts to calculate approximate spending. For context, North Korea's entire GDP in 1985 was approximately $20 billion. Palace construction consumed between 2 and 4% of the nation's total economic output over the decade. Meanwhile, the government allocated roughly $300 million annually to public health and education combined. The contrast became more stark as the 1990s approached. Soviet economic support, which had propped up North Korea's economy for decades, was collapsing. The USSR was in its final years. China's aid was decreasing as Beijing opened to market reforms. North Korea's economy began contracting in 1989. Food production declined. Factories closed. Electricity became unreliable. Palace construction continued without interruption. In 1991, as Soviet aid ended entirely, Kim Jong-il ordered renovations at 3 additional compounds. The work included installing new kitchen equipment, upgrading entertainment systems, and expanding guest facilities. The cost exceeded $50 million, at a time when the government began reducing food rations to the general population. The amenities installed during this period reflected luxury unimaginable to ordinary North Koreans. Ryong-song's main residence featured a private cinema with 50 leather seats. The horse stables at Hyangsan housed European thoroughbreds that required imported feed unavailable to livestock farms serving the population. Swimming pools were maintained at precise temperatures year-round, while many citizens lacked reliable heat in winter. One compound received a bowling alley with automatic pin setters purchased from an American manufacturer through a Canadian intermediary. Another got a shooting range with electronic targeting systems. A third was equipped with a full gymnasium containing exercise equipment from Technogym, an Italian manufacturer. The combined cost of recreational facilities at just 3 compounds exceeded $3 million. Private train stations were constructed at major compounds. The stations featured platforms covered by permanent structures and waiting areas with climate control. Kim Jong-il traveled between residences in armored train cars, fitted with bedrooms, dining areas, and communications equipment. The train system allowed movement without using roads where observation might be possible. By 1994, the main construction phase was complete. At least 12 major compounds existed in various locations. Some intelligence estimates suggested the number was higher. Each compound featured multiple buildings, extensive security, and amenities ranging from practical to extravagant. Underground infrastructure connected key structures. Power systems operated independently of the national grid. Water came from dedicated sources. The compounds could function even if surrounding areas lost utilities entirely. The palace system represented more than wealth or security. It represented calculated decisions about resource allocation. Every ton of Italian marble was material that did not go to public housing. Every dollar spent on gold bathroom fixtures was a dollar not spent on hospitals or schools. Every worker assigned to palace construction was labor unavailable for infrastructure that might have prevented the coming catastrophe. The famine was already beginning. In some northern provinces, crop failures had started in 1993. The government had reduced rations but kept the full extent of the crisis quiet. Within 2 years, the situation would become catastrophic. The palaces were finished. The tunnels were complete. Security forces were in position. Every villa was furnished and equipped. Everything was ready. Now came the part the Kim family had been anticipating for decades, living in luxury while the nation descended into famine. A typical day at Ryongsong residence began hours before the Kim family woke. Kitchen staff arrived at 4 a.m. to prepare breakfast. Security forces changed shifts at 5 a.m. Groundskeepers checked the property for anything unusual. Housekeeping staff began cleaning rooms the family was not currently occupying. The compound required approximately 300 people to maintain daily operations. The kitchen employed 50 people working in rotating teams. Head chefs had been recruited from top restaurants in Pyongyang and sent abroad for training in French and Italian cooking techniques. Sous chefs specialized in different cuisines. Bakers prepared fresh bread daily. Pastry chefs made desserts. A dedicated staff member managed the wine cellar containing more than 10,000 bottles. Food supplies arrived daily from multiple sources. Vegetables came from farms reserved exclusively for leadership use. These farms received fertilizer, equipment, and labor that regular collective farms could not access. Seafood was flown in from coastal areas. Beef came from cattle herds maintained specifically for the palaces. Nothing served at leadership residences was available through the public distribution system that fed ordinary citizens. Imported delicacies supplemented domestic production. Kenji Fujimoto, a Japanese chef who worked at the palaces from 1988 to 2001, later described the procurement system in detail. Sushi-grade tuna was flown from Tokyo's Tsukiji fish market twice weekly. French cheeses arrived via Beijing. Caviar came from Russian suppliers. Fresh fruit during winter months was sourced from Southeast Asian exporters who believed they were selling to Chinese buyers. Kim Jong-il maintained specific preferences that staff accommodated without question. He drank Hennessy Paradise Cognac, which cost approximately $700 per bottle in the 1,990 seconds. He consumed shark fin soup prepared according to precise specifications. He preferred Danish beer and French wines from specific vintages. His food was tested for poison before serving. Multiple dishes were prepared for each meal, so he could choose without announcing his selection in advance. Entertainment facilities operated around the clock. The private cinema at Ryongsong screened films nightly. Kim Jong-il reportedly owned a collection of more than 20,000 movies, including Hollywood productions obtained through underground channels despite official anti-American rhetoric. Projection staff maintained equipment and prepared screenings according to his preferences, which could change without notice. Musical performances happened regularly. The Pochonbo Electronic Ensemble, a state-sponsored group, performed at palaces for private audiences. Individual musicians and singers were summoned to perform on short notice. Refusal was not an option. A defector who served as a palace musician later recalled being called at midnight to perform for Kim Jong-il and guests. The performance lasted until dawn. No one could leave until dismissed. Guest facilities accommodated visiting officials from China, Russia, and other nations maintaining relations with North Korea. Chinese delegations received tours of selected areas within compounds. They were served elaborate meals and entertained with performances. The hospitality demonstrated that North Korean leadership commanded significant resources. The visits served diplomatic purposes while showcasing regime stability. The palaces also functioned as sites for internal party meetings. Senior officials were granted access for consultations or celebrations. Loyalty was rewarded with invitations to residence events. The access itself conveyed status within the political hierarchy. Being invited to a palace gathering signaled trust and importance. Security operations required the largest staff allocation. Each major compound employed between 100 and 200 guards, working in rotating shifts. Perimeter security ran 24 hours without interruption. Interior guards monitored specific buildings and corridors. Communications staff maintained contact between compounds. The security infrastructure at a single palace exceeded the protection provided for most national leaders elsewhere. Staff were rotated regularly to prevent excessive familiarity with palace operations. Guards served 6-month assignments before transfer. Household workers rarely stayed longer than 3 years at one location. The rotation made it difficult for any individual to gain comprehensive knowledge of the system. It also reduced the risk of staff developing personal loyalties that might compromise security. The underground tunnel network allowed movement between residences without surface travel. Kim Jong-il used the system extensively, moving between Pyongyang compounds via tunnels equipped with rail lines for electric cars. The tunnels featured air filtration, communications equipment, and emergency supplies. Travel through the tunnel system was invisible to outside observation. This elaborate infrastructure operated against an increasingly dire backdrop. In 1994, Kim Il-sung died. His son assumed full control. That same year, North Korea experienced the first severe food shortages that would develop into catastrophic famine. Floods destroyed crops. The government's centralized distribution system began failing. Rations were reduced, then reduced again. By 1995, the situation was desperate in many regions. The northeastern provinces faced starvation. People stripped bark from trees to make soup. They gathered grass and weeds to supplement vanishing rations. Urban areas fared slightly better, but even Pyongyang residents saw rations cut to levels insufficient for survival. Citizens began leaving the country illegally, crossing into China to search for food. The famine peaked between 1996 and 1998. Estimates of total deaths vary. North Korean government figures, released years later, claimed 220,000 deaths from starvation-related causes. South Korean and international organizations estimated between 600,000 and 1 million deaths, approximately 3 to 5% of the total population. Some researchers suggested the number could be higher. Palace operations continued without interruption. Food supplies to leadership compounds never faltered. The farms and procurement networks that served the Kim family operated independently of the failing public distribution system. Defectors who worked at the palaces during this period later described the stark disconnect. One former palace worker recounted that staff meals at Ryongsong included meat, fish, rice, vegetables, and fruit daily throughout the famine years. The quantities were sufficient, the quality was good. Staff were told never to discuss what they ate with family members outside the compounds. Violating this rule meant reassignment, or worse. Another defector described working in procurement during 1997, the worst year of the famine. His duties included arranging shipments of imported cognac, French wine, and luxury foods. He processed invoices totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars monthly, while reports circulated about people dying in the countryside. The disconnect was so extreme, it felt surreal, but questioning it was impossible. Kim Jong-il's lifestyle remained unchanged. Fujimoto, the Japanese chef, later published accounts of dinner parties at Wonsan compound during 1996. Guests consumed lobster, imported beef, sushi prepared from fish flown in that morning, and bottles of wine costing thousands of dollars. Entertainment included performances by musicians and dancers. The evenings lasted until dawn. No one at these gatherings discussed the famine. The underground tunnel system saw increased use during this period. Moving between residences on surface roads meant potentially encountering evidence of the crisis. Tunnels allowed leadership to travel invisibly. The separation from population suffering became more complete. International food aid began arriving in 1995. The World Food Program and various NGOs sent rice, corn, and other staples. The aid was meant for the general population. Reports emerged that significant portions were diverted. Some went to military stocks. Some disappeared into networks serving the elite. Tracking was difficult because the North Korean government controlled distribution and access. By 1999, the worst of the famine had passed. Survivors had developed coping mechanisms. Black markets emerged, where people traded goods and food outside the official system. But the death toll was final. Hundreds of thousands were gone. The trauma affected a generation. The palace system had weathered the crisis without visible impact. No compounds were closed to save money. No staff were reduced to redirect resources. Construction that had been postponed during the famine's peak resumed afterward. The priorities had remained consistent. Comparison to other communist leaders reveals how extreme North Korea's system was. Mao Zedong lived in relative comfort during China's Great Famine, but his lifestyle during the crisis did not approach the luxury maintained at North Korean palaces. Soviet leaders during times of hardship reduced visible excess. Romanian dictator Nicolae Ceausescu built elaborate palaces, but not an archipelago of them, while famine killed his population. The North Korean palace system, during the 1992 famine, represented something distinct. It demonstrated that the leadership's comfort would be maintained regardless of population suffering. The separation was not just physical, it was ideological. The palaces existed in a different reality than the nation they occupied. The system had proven its resilience. Economic collapse had not touched it. Famine had not reduced it. The compounds remained fully operational, fully staffed, fully supplied. They functioned exactly as designed, insulated from consequences. For decades, this reality remained largely hidden. Defectors described it, but without proof, their accounts seemed too extreme to be fully credible. The scale was difficult to believe. A nation where millions starved was simultaneously maintaining multiple palaces with underground tunnels, imported delicacies, and hundreds of staff? The testimony existed. The witnesses were credible, but physical evidence was scarce. Then technology caught up, and someone who had lived inside decided to talk publicly. Hwang Jong-yup crossed into the South Korean embassy in Beijing on the 12th of February 1997. He was 73 years old and had served as secretary of the Workers' Party of Korea. His position made him the highest-ranking North Korean official ever to defect. His departure sent immediate shockwaves through Pyongyang's leadership. Hwang had been Kim Jong-il's tutor in political ideology during the 1970 seconds. He helped develop Juche philosophy into its final form. He had access to inner circles that few outside the Kim family ever reached. He knew details about the regime's operations that had never been revealed publicly. During debriefings with South Korean intelligence, he described the palace system in detail. He provided locations for major compounds. He estimated their costs. He described security procedures and staff operations. He explained how Bureau 39 funded the construction and maintenance through illicit trade networks. His testimony confirmed what analysts had suspected but could not prove. International media initially treated his accounts with skepticism. A palace system costing billions, while the population starved, seemed too extreme. The numbers he cited appeared exaggerated. Western journalists questioned whether a single individual could have such comprehensive knowledge. South Korean intelligence vouched for his credibility, but doubt persisted. 4 years later, another defector provided different but equally detailed testimony. Kenji Fujimoto was a Japanese chef who had worked at Kim family palaces from 1988 to 2001. His real name was not Fujimoto. He used a pseudonym to protect family members still in Japan who might face retaliation. His account focused on daily life rather than political structure. Fujimoto described meals in exhaustive detail. He recalled specific dishes prepared for Kim Jong-il. He remembered wine vintages served at dinner parties. He knew the layout of kitchens at multiple compounds. He could describe security procedures for food preparation and the system for importing ingredients. The level of detail made fabrication unlikely. He recounted a trip to Wonsan compound in 1996, during the famine's worst year. Staff prepared a birthday celebration for Kim Jong-il. The menu included lobster flown from Japan, imported beef, and caviar. Dozens of bottles of expensive wine were opened. Entertainment included performances by musicians brought from Pyongyang specifically for the event. The party lasted until dawn. No one mentioned that people were starving 50 miles away. Fujimoto also described Kim Jong-il's personal habits. He consumed Hennessy Paradise cognac regularly. He preferred specific brands of beer and champagne. He maintained strict requirements for rice preparation. Food had to be tested for poison before serving. Multiple dishes were prepared for each meal, so his actual selection could not be predicted. The routine reflected paranoia as much as luxury. Other defectors followed over subsequent years. A security guard who served at Ryongsong residence provided details about underground tunnel systems and perimeter security. A construction worker described building swimming pools and entertainment facilities. A household staff member recalled the rotation system that prevented any individual from gaining too much knowledge about palace operations. The testimonies corroborated each other on major points. Defectors who had never met described the same locations, similar security procedures, and consistent patterns of luxury consumption. The overlap suggested accuracy rather than coordinated fabrication. Each account added details the others had missed. Some defectors provided information that seemed impossible to verify. A former party official described underground rail lines connecting Pyongyang compounds. Another mentioned a private horse racing track at a mountain retreat. A third recalled seeing imported sports cars stored in climate-controlled garages. Without physical evidence, these claims remained unconfirmed. The personal cost for defectors was substantial. North Korean policy punished families of those who fled. Parents, siblings, and children faced imprisonment or forced relocation to remote areas. Defectors lived with the knowledge that their testimonies had likely destroyed their families' lives. Most spoke anyway, believing the information was important enough to justify the sacrifice. Fujimoto eventually returned to North Korea briefly in 2012 after Kim Jong-il's death, visiting Kim Jong-un. He left again afterward and resumed living in Japan under protection. His willingness to return, even temporarily, suggested his accounts were accurate. Fabrications would have made such a return suicidal. The cumulative effect of defector testimonies through the early 2000s created a detailed picture of the palace system. Analysts could map approximate locations based on descriptions. They understood the basic structure of security and operations. They knew the scale of spending and the sources of funding. What they lacked was visual confirmation. Satellite technology in the 1990 seconds had limitations. Resolution was improving, but remained insufficient for detailed analysis of specific structures. Governments with advanced surveillance capabilities kept their imagery classified. Commercial satellites existed, but their data was expensive and rarely focused on North Korea. The gap between defector testimony and visual proof remained wide. That gap was about to close. Commercial satellite imagery was becoming increasingly accessible. Resolution was improving rapidly. Researchers outside government intelligence agencies were gaining access to tools that had previously been restricted. The technology that would expose the palace system completely was already in orbit. Defector testimonies had provided the map. Satellites would confirm every detail. Google Earth launched to the public on the 28th of June 2005. The free software allowed anyone with an internet connection to view satellite imagery of the entire planet. Resolution varied by location, but populated areas typically offered details sufficient to identify individual buildings, roads, and landscape features. North Korea was included in the coverage. Within weeks, researchers began examining North Korean territory systematically. What defectors had described could now be verified visually. A researcher could type coordinates into Google Earth and see exactly what existed at that location. The palace system, hidden for decades, became visible to anyone curious enough to look. The imagery confirmed defector testimonies with remarkable precision. Huang Zhongyop had described a massive compound north of Pyongyang with multiple villas and extensive security perimeters. Satellite imagery showed exactly that. At the coordinates matching his description, Fujimoto had mentioned a coastal complex near Wonsan with a private harbor. The harbor was visible from space, along with surrounding buildings and infrastructure. Curtis Melvin, a graduate student at Johns Hopkins University, began a systematic mapping project in 2007. He used Google Earth to identify and catalog North Korean palace complexes, military installations, and government facilities. The work was painstaking. He examined thousands of square miles of territory, looking for patterns that indicated official use rather than civilian occupation. Palaces had distinctive signatures, large compounds with multiple buildings inside security perimeters, manicured grounds in a country where most land showed signs of agricultural stress or neglect, swimming pools, tennis courts, and other recreational facilities rarely found elsewhere in North Korea. Private road networks leading to compounds but not connecting to public routes. Helipads positioned for rapid evacuation. Melvin documented his findings on a blog and through Google Earth files that other researchers could download and examine. By 2009, he had identified at least 17 major palace complexes. Each entry included coordinates, photographs from satellite imagery, and analysis of visible features. The work was amateur in the sense that Melvin had no official intelligence role, but the methodology was rigorous, and the results were verifiable. Professional intelligence agencies had possessed similar imagery for years through classified satellite systems. What Melvin demonstrated was that expensive government surveillance was no longer necessary. Commercial satellites now provided resolution adequate for detailed analysis. The information was available to anyone willing to invest time examining it. The features visible from space were often stunning in their luxury. Ryongsong residents showed multiple swimming pools, including one Olympic-sized facility. Equestrian facilities at mountain retreats included what appeared to be racing tracks. Coastal compounds featured private harbors with yacht berths. One palace complex near Pyongyang included what analysts identified as a water park with slides and pools. Researchers also identified underground infrastructure. Tunnel entrances appeared as distinctive openings in hillsides near palace grounds. Ventilation structures indicated extensive underground networks. Some tunnels connected different sections of the same compound. Others appeared to link separate palaces located miles apart. The full extent remained unclear, but satellite imagery confirmed that substantial underground construction existed. The North Korean government responded to the exposure with countermeasures. Camouflage netting appeared over certain facilities between 2007 and 2010. Trees were planted to obscure buildings from overhead view. Some compounds added structures that appeared to be decoys, empty buildings designed to confuse analysis about which facilities were actually used. The efforts had limited effect. Satellite imagery updated regularly, and changes themselves revealed which sites the regime considered important enough to protect. International organizations incorporated satellite evidence into human rights documentation. The Committee for Human Rights in North Korea published reports using imagery to demonstrate resource allocation. The United Nations Commission of Inquiry referenced satellite photographs in its 2014 report on human rights violations. The visual evidence made arguments about regime priorities impossible to dismiss as propaganda or exaggeration. Comparison between satellite imagery and official North Korean statements revealed massive discrepancies. The government claimed leadership lived modestly while dedicating national resources to the people. Satellite photographs showed palace compounds that consumed hundreds of acres with amenities unavailable to the population. The contradiction was absolute and visible. Academic researchers used the imagery for economic analysis. They calculated approximate construction costs based on facility sizes and features. They estimated ongoing maintenance expenses. They compared the palace system's resource consumption to national budgets for health, education, and infrastructure. The numbers confirmed what defectors had described. Billions had been spent on facilities serving a tiny elite while the general population struggled with poverty. By 2010, the documentation was comprehensive. Major palace locations were mapped with precise coordinates. Features at each compound were catalogued. Historical satellite imagery allowed researchers to track construction over time, watching as compounds expanded or new facilities were added. The palace system's geography was no longer secret. It was public knowledge available to anyone with internet access. The regime's response was largely silence. Official media never acknowledged the palaces existed. When foreign journalists raised questions about specific compounds, government representatives typically denied the facilities were personal residences, claiming they were government offices or military installations. The denials were undermined by the scale of luxury visible in satellite imagery. Government offices rarely require Olympic-sized swimming pools or private racetracks. Some palace locations remained partially obscured. Dense tree cover prevented clear views of certain mountain retreats. Underground facilities were by definition invisible to satellites. Analysts estimated the full system was larger than what imagery revealed. But even conservative counts documented at least 17 major complexes and dozens of smaller compounds. The minimum estimate was staggering enough. The technological exposure represented a fundamental shift. For 5 decades, the palace system had operated in relative secrecy. Defectors provided testimony, but visual proof was scarce. After 2005, the evidence was overwhelming and accessible. The regime could no longer credibly deny what satellites showed the entire world. The situation created an unusual dynamic. North Korean citizens remained mostly unaware of the full scope of the palace system. Internet access was virtually non-existent for ordinary people. Information was controlled. But internationally, the palaces were documented, analyzed, and catalogued in exhaustive detail. The secret geography of elite North Korea was secret only to North Koreans themselves. In 2011, Kim Jong-il died suddenly. His youngest son, Kim Jong-un, inherited power. The new leader was 27 years old, educated partly in Switzerland, and raised in the palace system his grandfather had created and his father had expanded. He inherited not just political control, but a network of luxury estates that were now fully documented by international observers. The question facing analysts was not whether the palaces existed. Satellite imagery had settled that question definitively. The question was what Kim Jong-un would do with them. Would he maintain the system as inherited, scale it back in response to international pressure, or expand it further, defying the exposure that satellites had made inevitable? The answer would become clear within months, and it would demonstrate that visibility did not equal accountability. The 17th of December 2011, Kim Jong-il died of a heart attack while traveling by train between residences. His youngest son, Kim Jong-un, was designated successor. He was 27 years old. He had been groomed for leadership for barely 3 years. International analysts questioned whether someone so young could maintain control of the military and party apparatus his father and grandfather had built. Kim Jong-un inherited absolute power and a palace system that was no longer secret. Satellite imagery had documented every major compound. Defector testimonies had described the interiors. International organizations had cataloged the facilities in exhaustive reports. The world knew exactly what existed and approximately what it had cost. His response became clear within months. Rather than scaling back the visible luxury that generated international criticism, he expanded it. Renovation work at Ryongsong residence began in early 2012. Satellite imagery from March showed construction equipment and material deliveries at the compound. Existing buildings received upgrades. New structures appeared within the security perimeter by August. Analysts tracking the changes estimated costs in the tens of millions. The work happened while North Korea faced its strictest international sanctions to date. The United Nations had imposed sanctions targeting luxury goods in 2006 after North Korea's first nuclear test. Additional restrictions came in 2009 and 2013. The measures prohibited exports of items including yachts, luxury automobiles, certain electronics, and high-end materials. The goal was preventing the regime from acquiring goods that served elite consumption while the population struggled. Kim Jong-un appeared unconcerned. Construction continued at multiple palace sites throughout 2012 and 2013. Satellite imagery documented the work in real time. Researchers could watch as buildings rose and grounds expanded. The visibility made the defiance more obvious. The regime was not hiding its priorities, it was demonstrating them. Wonsan became the signature project of Kim Jong-un's early rule. The coastal compound that his father had used occasionally would become a massive resort complex. Construction began in 2013 on a scale that exceeded any previous palace expansion. Satellite imagery showed the transformation month by month. A private yacht basin was excavated and constructed between 2013 and 2014. The harbor featured moorings for multiple vessels and support facilities that appeared to include maintenance buildings and fuel storage. An equestrian center appeared in 2014, complete with stables, training facilities, and what analysts identified as a show-jumping course. A ski resort was constructed on nearby mountains between 2015 and 2017, featuring multiple runs, lift systems, and lodge buildings. A water park with slides and pools was built adjacent to the main compound in 2016. The total investment in Wonsan exceeded $600 million, according to estimates from South Korean intelligence agencies. The figure was based on construction visible in satellite imagery, combined with known costs for similar facilities elsewhere. The actual amount could be higher. Underground construction and interior work were invisible to satellites. The timing was deliberate. Each major UN sanctions resolution was followed within months by new construction activity. In March 2013, the Security Council imposed comprehensive sanctions targeting North Korea's nuclear program. By June 2013, satellite imagery showed major excavation work beginning at Wonsan. In March 2016, additional sanctions targeted the regime's foreign currency earnings. By August 2016, the water park at Wonsan was under construction. The pattern suggested calculation rather than coincidence. Kim Jong-un was demonstrating that international pressure would not alter his priorities. The palaces would continue to receive resources regardless of economic constraints or diplomatic isolation. Modern amenities appeared despite trade restrictions. High-definition televisions and advanced electronics were banned under sanctions. Yet satellite imagery showed antenna arrays and satellite dishes at palace compounds, consistent with sophisticated communications equipment. Luxury vehicles appeared in compound courtyards. Swimming pools were maintained and expanded. The lifestyle continued without visible reduction. Kim Jong-un's approach differed from his father's in style but not substance. Kim Jong-il had attempted to maintain some discretion about palace luxury. He rarely appeared publicly at the most extravagant facilities. Kim Jong-un was more brazen. State media published photographs of him at Wonsan's equestrian center and ski resort. The images were meant for domestic consumption, showing the leader enjoying facilities unavailable to citizens, but they also confirmed what satellites revealed. The comparison to his grandfather was equally revealing. Kim Il-sung had built the palace system in secrecy during an era when satellite surveillance was primitive and defector testimonies were difficult to verify. Kim Jong-un inherited a system that was fully documented and expanded it anyway. The secrecy was gone, but the spending continued. The defiance had limits. Some planned projects were scaled back or canceled when funding proved insufficient. A rumored second ski resort near the Chinese border never materialized beyond initial site preparation. Several coastal facilities remained partially completed for years. But the core palace system not only survived international pressure, it grew. By 2020, satellite imagery showed active construction or renovation at more than half of the major palace complexes identified by researchers. The work continued through the COVID-19 pandemic, which North Korea addressed by closing its borders entirely. Even as the economy contracted under sanctions and pandemic isolation, palace construction proceeded. The total spending under Kim Jong-un's rule from 2011 through 2020 was estimated at over $1 billion. The figure included new construction, renovations, ongoing maintenance, and operations. For context, North Korea's entire annual budget for public health was approximately $200 million during this period. Kim Jong-un had answered the question analysts asked when he took power. The palace system would not be reduced. It would not be hidden better. It would be expanded openly, in full view of satellites, despite international condemnation and domestic poverty. The architecture of permanent power that his grandfather created and his father elaborated would continue under the third generation. Visibility had not created accountability. Documentation had not produced change. The palaces stood, visible from space, expanding year by year. Today, satellite imagery updates regularly. Researchers can track construction progress in near real time. Every palace compound is documented. Every expansion is cataloged. The system Kim Il-sung started 70 years ago now spans the entire country, visible to anyone with internet access and the curiosity to look. What those images reveal about North Korea's priorities requires no interpretation. The numbers speak for themselves. Satellite imagery from January 2025 provides the most comprehensive view yet of North Korea's palace system. The resolution is sufficient to identify individual buildings, recreational facilities, and security infrastructure at each major compound. 70 years after Kim Il-sung built the first modest leadership residence, the full scope of what 3 generations created is visible from space. At least 17 major palace complexes are confirmed. Dozens of smaller compounds and retreat facilities add to the total. Conservative estimates place the cumulative construction and maintenance spending at over $5 billion since 1953. The figure could be substantially higher. Underground construction, interior work, and classified facilities remain invisible to satellites. Ryongsong Residence number 55, remains the primary compound. Located north of Pyongyang, it spans more than 460 acres. Satellite imagery shows 9 gated villas within the security perimeter. Multiple swimming pools include one Olympic-sized facility maintained year-round. An equestrian center features stables for imported horses. Underground bunkers extend beneath the main buildings. A private train station allows secure arrivals and departures. Security infrastructure includes multiple perimeter walls, guard towers every 200 meters, and what appears to be sophisticated electronic surveillance systems. Staff quarters house hundreds. The estimated original construction cost exceeded $200 million. Annual maintenance is estimated at $15 million. Hyangsan, residence number 3, occupies mountainous terrain near Myeongsan. The compound offers cool temperatures during summer months. Satellite imagery from 2024 shows multiple villas, a private theater, indoor swimming pools, and extensive gardens. The theater reportedly seats 200 and features projection equipment for Kim Jong-il's film collection. Horse facilities include training areas and trails. Underground tunnel networks connect major buildings. The location provides both luxury and security. Mountain terrain makes approach difficult. The compound can be sealed completely during emergencies. Construction costs were estimated at $150 million. Ongoing maintenance runs approximately $10 million annually. Wonsan Coastal Complex represents Kim Jong-un's signature addition to the system. Construction that began in 2013 transformed a modest retreat into a massive resort. The latest satellite imagery shows a private yacht basin with moorings for multiple vessels. An equestrian center rivals facilities at other compounds. A ski resort on nearby mountains features multiple runs and lift systems. A water park includes slides, pools, and support facilities. Private beaches are maintained along several kilometers of coastline. Guest villas accommodate visiting officials. The total investment exceeded $600 million, according to South Korean intelligence estimates. Annual operating costs are projected at $25 million. Additional major compounds are scattered across the country. A Pyongyang facility serves as an official headquarters, but includes residential quarters and recreational amenities. Coastal locations near Hamhung and other cities provide ocean access. Mountain retreats offer security and isolation. Each compound features similar infrastructure: multiple buildings, extensive security, underground networks, recreational facilities, and staff quarters. The pattern repeats with variations based on geography and specific purposes. The underground tunnel system connects many compounds. Intelligence estimates suggest hundreds of kilometers of tunnels exist beneath palace complexes and between separate facilities. The network allows movement invisible to surface observation. Some tunnels accommodate vehicles. All feature air filtration, communications equipment, and emergency supplies. The construction costs for underground infrastructure alone likely exceeded $500 million over 7 decades. Security infrastructure across all compounds employs thousands. Guard forces rotate through assignments. Perimeter walls and fencing extend for miles. Electronic surveillance systems imported despite sanctions monitor approaches. Motion sensors, cameras, and alarm systems protect every facility. Communications networks operate independently of civilian infrastructure. The security apparatus dedicated solely to protecting palace compounds rivals the forces defending some national borders. The cumulative cost over 70 years requires perspective. North Korea's GDP in 2024 is estimated at approximately $28 billion. The $5 billion spent on palaces represents nearly 20% of the current annual economic output. Spread across 7 decades, palace construction and maintenance average $70 million annually. For comparison, North Korea's entire public health budget averages $200 million per year. Education receives approximately $150 million annually. Infrastructure investment outside of palaces is minimal. The contrast becomes sharper when examining population conditions. The United Nations World Food Program reported in 2024 that 42% of North Koreans suffer from chronic malnutrition. Food insecurity affects the majority of the population. The public distribution system that once provided basic rations now functions irregularly in many regions. Black markets supply what official channels cannot. Electricity remains unreliable throughout the country. Satellite imagery of North Korea at night shows darkness across most territory. South Korea blazes with light. The border between them is visible from space as a line between illumination and void. Exceptions exist within North Korea. Pyongyang shows some lighting. Military installations glow. And palace compounds blaze brightly, their security lighting and powered facilities clearly visible in nighttime satellite photographs. Rural infrastructure is collapsing. Roads deteriorate without maintenance. Bridges show signs of dangerous neglect. Rail systems built during the Soviet era are failing. Water treatment facilities operate intermittently or not at all. The physical infrastructure supporting daily life has been allowed to decay, while palace compounds receive constant upgrades. Health outcomes reflect these priorities. Life expectancy in North Korea is approximately 72 years, roughly 10 years below South Korea. Infant mortality is substantially higher. Preventable diseases that are rare in developed nations remain common. Medical facilities outside Pyongyang lack basic equipment and supplies. Defectors consistently describe a health system that serves the elite adequately but fails the general population. The human cost can be calculated. The $5 billion spent on palaces could have built hundreds of hospitals. It could have modernized the electrical grid. It could have maintained roads and bridges. It could have imported food during the famine that killed hundreds of thousands. Every ton of Italian marble was medical equipment not purchased. Every gold-plated bathroom fixture was medicine not distributed. Every franc spent on French silk was food not imported. Defectors who have left North Korea in recent years describe a system that has not changed fundamentally despite international pressure. The palace complexes continue to receive resources. Staff rotations continue. Security forces remain in position. Maintenance proceeds regardless of economic conditions elsewhere. A former palace worker who escaped in 2019 reported that Wonsan's facilities were fully operational and expanding. The contrast with surrounding areas was absolute. International response has been consistent but ineffective. United Nations sanctions target luxury goods and regime funding. Human rights organizations document abuses and resource misallocation. Academic researchers publish detailed analyses of satellite imagery. Media coverage highlights the contradictions. None of it has altered the basic reality. The palaces continue to exist and expand. Comparison to other authoritarian regimes reveals how extreme North Korea's system is. China's leaders maintain compounds in Beijing and elsewhere, but nothing approaching the scale or luxury visible in North Korean palace complexes. Russia's government elite control substantial resources, but their residences, while lavish, do not consume comparable portions of national GDP. Former dictators who built elaborate palaces, from Romania's Ceausescu to Iraq's Hussein, constructed fewer facilities at less relative cost to their national economies. The North Korean palace system is unprecedented in its scope relative to national wealth. It represents a larger share of GDP than any comparable authoritarian construction program. It has persisted longer than most dictatorships survive. It has continued expanding despite famine, economic collapse, international sanctions, and complete exposure through satellite surveillance. The palaces matter because they are physical manifestations of priorities. Every building, every swimming pool, every underground tunnel, every security system represents a choice. Resources are finite. Every dollar spent on palace construction is a dollar not spent on the population. The allocation is not accidental. It is policy. The buildings serve purposes beyond luxury. They provide security through dispersion and fortification. They demonstrate power to those granted access. They create distance between leadership and the consequences of leadership decisions. But their primary function is visible in satellite imagery. They exist to provide comfort and luxury for a tiny elite, while the nation they occupy struggles with poverty. The palace system has survived everything. Economic collapse in the 1990 seconds did not reduce it. Famine that killed hundreds of thousands did not pause construction. International sanctions did not prevent expansion. Satellite exposure that revealed every facility to the world did not create accountability. The system that Kim Il-sung started in 1953 with a single compound north of Pyongyang has grown into an archipelago of luxury spanning the entire country. Satellite imagery updates regularly. Researchers track construction progress in near real time. Every palace is documented. Every expansion is photographed. The documentation is comprehensive and publicly available. Anyone with internet access can view the compounds in detail. The geographic coordinates are published. The facilities are mapped. The secrecy that protected the system for decades is gone entirely. But visibility has not created change. The palaces remain. Construction continues. Kim Jong-un visits Wonsan ski resort and appears in state media photographs, enjoying facilities his population will never access. The gap between elite luxury and mass poverty has not narrowed. It has widened. The contradiction is absolute and visible from space. On a clear night, satellite imagery shows the contrast in stark terms. Palace compounds glow with electric light. Security perimeters are illuminated. Buildings are powered. Just miles away, villages sit in darkness. No streetlights. Limited electricity. The boundary between them is sharp and unambiguous. The palaces stand as permanent records of allocation choices made across 3 generations. Kim Il-sung built the foundation. Kim Jong-il expanded it into something far more elaborate. Kim Jong-un has continued the work despite complete exposure. Together they created monuments not to achievement, but to priorities. What generated international condemnation, nuclear weapons, and military parades, masked what truly defined the regime. Billions spent on luxury for one family, while millions went hungry. The palace system is the most honest statement of values North Korea's government has ever made. It is built in stone and marble and gold leaf. It is maintained by thousands of workers. It is visible from space. It is impossible to deny. The buildings remain. The tunnels extend beneath them. Security forces patrol the perimeters. The lights stay on. And 20 miles away, villages sit dark.